Thank you all for coming. This is Music Education and Employment Bridging the Gap. We're going to explore a lot of different topics surrounding music education and employment, as you would guess, in addition to economic development, a future outlook on the landscape of music education. This is a very important panel. This is something that everyone up here has been specifically and strategically brought in for. We have varying levels of expertise, varying backgrounds, things like that. So thank you all for joining. We'll go ahead and jump into it now. I'd like to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go ahead and start with Jen Appel to my left here.
Awesome. How are you guys? Awesome. Good. My name is Jen Appel. I am the graduate faculty advisor at Florida Atlantic University. I teach PR, marketing, social media, research intensive, and I am the faculty advisor for the student-run record label called Hoot Wisdom Recordings. We have 2 Grammy nominations under our belt, which we're really excited about. And outside of teaching, I'm the CEO and founder of the Catalyst Publicity Group. We help emerging artists and establishing artists, help them through their album releases. So I'm excited to chat with you guys.
I'm Ulf Oesterle. I teach with the band year program at Syracuse University. I've been there for about 15 years at the university, teaching primarily music business, but a lot in emerging technologies, entrepreneurship, television, radio, film business, and have over 10 years of internship oversight for students across the board. Some of the students that have come through our programs have had some pretty good success over the years. After the fact, chain smokers is the one that we like to kind of wave the flag a little bit with Drew Taggart being an alum, but there are many more on the business side that have been there. And like Jen, I also continue to work in the industry. I launched a record label in 2003 and continue to run that, O Records and management as part of my side hustle outside of teaching. I've been a program director for a graduate program, undergraduate program, department chair, and I've worked in a couple different colleges on the campus of Syracuse.
I'm Dwight Heckelman. I am the founder, director, and custodial technician at GrooveU. We're a 2-year music industry program in Columbus, Ohio. My background is I spent about 20 years in the industry, major labels, indie labels, music publishers, recording studios. Got into higher ed in 2003, I think that's right, maybe 2004. Taught at technical colleges, Berklee College of Music, Otterbein before launching GrooveU in 2012. So we are in our 7th academic year now. We boast 96% job placement in field, so.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here again. These are all great friends of mine, great colleagues. My name is Brian Penick. I was a former professional musician for 12 years, international touring and recording. I since have launched several music startups, including Musician's Desk Reference, which is a music ed tech platform, Music Career Map, which is a career development platform. I have Soundster, which is a music licensing and event advertising entity that was actually acquired twice from me. And since I've segued into venture capital, so now I'm the CMO of Loud Capital, which is an alternative investment firm out of Columbus, Ohio. And we just launched Legacy Entertainment Ventures, which is a private label venture-focused service suite for music, esports, and influencers. But the most important part of this is the context of my background, because I'm a college dropout. And I will not speak negatively about the program that I was formerly involved in as a student, because I do a lot of work with them, but it's important to realize that learning and experience, that while they can happen, in a very symbiotic relationship, the basis of this panel is to explore the boundaries of how education in a formal environment, education in an independent environment can both lead to employment, and we're going to talk about a lot of great things today. So jumping straight into the panel itself, the reason that we're here is you have a lot of changes happening in the music education landscape. You have employers that feel extremely disconnected to the educators of the world. You have educators who are not boasting about success of graduation, success of their retention rates. Actually, if you go into the field, those numbers are almost impossible to find. So I'd like to start with music education, as one of the pillars, and run through with each one of these panelists as far as course development and curriculum, content resources, what is the strategy and the philosophy of their programs, and one of the most important topics that we were just discussing before the panel, which is how often they actually go back and reflect on the curriculum that they're teaching and the program itself, actually assessing the value that they're providing in a modernized sense to their students and the overall industry. So Jen, do you want to go ahead and start us off? Just, feel free to explore any of the boundaries that are on the screen here, but I'd really like to hear your input on these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple of different types of classes. I want to start with my PR course because when I started 4 years ago teaching, there was sort of you have to guide with the textbook, and you need to have certain curriculum in order to get your students to where they need to be able to go into the PR and marketing field. Since I've gone into that, actually this year, I decided to eliminate a textbook. And I did that purely based off of how the students are adapting to what's happening in the industry. So part of one of my major semester-long projects was they had a hypothetical artist that they actually had to run a full PR campaign for their album release. And we actually used for the first time, actually Brian's recommendation with Musicians Desk Reference, using it as our guiding point for our week-to-week curriculum. So they were basically given a PDF description of what press release is, and then they would go into class. We would talk about it, we would learn it, we would do some workshops about it, and then they would go home and actually apply it to their artists. And then as far as my forum class, which is our student-run record label, it's completely hands-on. So we have a 2-part section of where they actually go through the production, and then they come to my section, they actually get to market. So we are putting on shows on campus, we're working with booking agencies, we're working with venues off campus, and we're really trying to make that impactful for the students. One of the great things that I feel very fortunate about is I get to make my own agenda. So every semester I'm redoing my curriculum. There is not one semester that I've taught that's exactly the same. I also wipe all of my PowerPoints every year. I just don't really see the value of teaching what may work 4 years ago into what I'm doing today, especially in the PR marketing, social media world. We all know that changes so rapidly. So I feel very fortunate that I have the support from my department to allow me to do that. So
that's great. I love that. And in full disclosure, both Jen and Dwight have used my platform before. We're certainly not up here pitching that, but I do want to disclose that. But it's amazing to think about, an actual college course that does not have a hard textbook. And, again, I applaud. Everyone up here is obviously going to talk about these points, but fortunately, everyone up here is actually scrubbing or at least assessing their curriculum on a consistent basis. But I've spoken to a lot of professors out there that, they don't touch it within years or maybe even within a decade. So, but yeah, please, all.
Well, I think it's a state of where we are in the industry right now that we have to go back and reassess what we're doing. And certainly on the administrative level, we've got a lot of pressure with assessment to make sure that what we are teaching is actually delivering what we say we're going to teach. And so at Syracuse, assessment is one of those meetings that happens very, very regularly. And so we look at that at the college level, but even more so at the granular level with the particular programs. With Bandier, we'll go through and every year, it is a refresh of what we're doing. We built out courses so that an emerging tech class might have 5 separate units in it, but those units can change year to year as technology changes. So, as we're looking at virtual reality, augmented reality, that might be part of it, and then building a chatbot, going into 3D printing. Well, 3D printing, maybe that's something we're going to cycle out as we get further into new developments. But we always do go back and look at what's happening because when you look at the 4 years that a student will spend at the college level, what we are teaching them doesn't always apply that 5th year once they graduate. So we've got to teach them skills that they can apply and really learn to work within a scenario and make decisions based off the information at hand. So it's a situation where I don't use any textbooks as well. I will go through and use Harvard cases that will be specific to particular students and the path that they might take, especially in the entrepreneurship areas. But I like to individualize the education that I give. And I'm fortunate in the sense that my classes are generally smaller, and I can do that. When you've got a class of 18 or 20, you can pick out those students and make sure that you're delivering what you're expected to deliver as a professor.
And Ulf, you mentioned earlier you've been teaching with Syracuse for about 14, 15 years now.
Yeah, I started when I was a doctoral student, and as part of the program there, you do teach. So I was teaching general communications classes. I taught in the advertising department, in the public relations department, media research, and then moved on into the music business coursework, and have taught every music industry class that Syracuse University offers over the last 10 years. And recently has been the entrepreneurship, the emerging tech, social media strategy classes, capstone courses that are a bit more entrepreneurial in nature. So I've been fortunate in that I've taught in several different areas across campus. And as someone who owns their own business, you run it all. And so I can apply what I've learned in business to the classroom as well.
That's great. It sounds like you've updated with the standards of the industry as well. So kudos. Thank you. Dwight has an interesting story as far as his background from organizations where he attended and he was employed and now leading to GrooveU. So I'd love for you to touch on that.
So ours is, our development side for curriculum is a little bit different maybe in that we meet every month with working industry professionals. So we have 6 areas of study at GrooveU: audio production, music business, live sound, video, interactive design, and an independent artist track. So every month that we're in session, we bring in industry professionals, we feed them lunch. It's very important in the music industry, feed people lunch. We sit them down at a table and we ask them like a series of questions. So how's your workload changed from this year to last year? If I gave you $20,000, how would you grow your business? And the outcome for asking those questions and constantly hearing from them is to figure out who they're hiring and why. Most importantly, not today, but 2 years from now, right? Because we're a 2-year program. So the idea here is that we learn these types of things and we implement them in real time as a way to be hyper flexible with our curriculum. So, we had one time in the middle of the term, and this was about 4 years ago, and it was our video panel, and the one that we asked that question, how is your business changing? And the video people say, drone pilots. And right, I'm in academia, quote unquote, and I didn't really see that coming in the way that they saw it coming. So we bought a drone the next day, and we dropped off like a fourth of that class outcomes that existed and replaced it with, shooting for drone, editing for drone, the whole 9 yards, and off we went. And now that's also, as Ulf said, that's cycling out in some respects as we replace it with new things. So
No, that's great.
we don't use any textbooks. We obviously use MDR, Brian's great resource. But we have this huge periodical library. We get all the trades. We have a curated Flipboard. I don't know if you're familiar with Flipboard. It's a platform, and students contribute content to it, and faculty contributes content to it. And so we're pulling down online things in real time for course projects.
To piggyback on that, with you bringing industry to you, that's a great way to go about this and really have that connection. And it's something we've built out over the years was essentially an advisory board. Some of which will be our alumni, where you've got 2 or 3 students from every graduating class, and then some of the more senior alums from Syracuse that are in the business to keep us fresh. And because we don't use textbook, we use a lot of industry documents. So if I'm teaching rights and royalties, I want to be sure I'm getting a recent publishing contract or label deal. And so we do tap into our alums pretty heavily to provide what will be the content for these classes. So if any of you are in a situation where you are teaching music business classes, if you haven't yet cultivated that alumni network that you can continue with, now's a great time to start because they're a huge resource for us.
That's incredible. Thank you all for sharing that. A few stats that we have just to share. As far as the national job placement average within first-year graduation for all fields, it's 53% for higher ed. Unfortunately, that data is not available specifically for the music sector, and that includes both performance-based and business-based programs. We do know that there are approximately 7,500 programs out, again, combination of performance and business, and that's about 330,000 students. And the average overall tuition for cost of a 4-year private music college is just under $47,000. So you have a lot of students, you have a lot of programs, you have a high cost of these programs, and it's just unfortunate going through and trying to find research. I love hearing about GrooveU's 96% post-graduation job placement rate. All of you said you've got, upwards of 100, right?
Yeah, we're nearly at 100%.
Yeah.
But that's a function of us being a small program.
Exactly.
We do take only 25 to 30 students a year, so it's exceptionally competitive to get in. And we did that by design because when we look at the landscape with the number of music industry graduates coming out generally across the board, we wanted to make sure that we were small so that we could take that student that's coming in and realistically place them with a position in the music business in an area where they want to work after graduation. Could we, the university would love for us to grow to 50, 60, 70 people a year. We've resisted that because we want to make sure that we are placing the students post-graduation.
No, absolutely, and that's so important. There's also, and full disclosure, we're working towards this, but essentially the development of a standard, a very modernized standard. Obviously you have great programs with all of these individuals up here. We pride ourselves on the content of something, what we have within Musician's Desk Reference, but there are a lot of, non-privatized schools. There are a lot of community colleges out there that have music programs. I've worked with schools that have 4 and 5 year curriculums that within that maybe it's only a semester or 2 tops of an actual music business program. So just briefly touching base on, obviously you have your own IP, you have your own content, but assuming that a development of a standard is made accessible, that is very modernized curriculum that does have some influence from the employers of the world to help increase the retention rates, to help increase potentially the deal flow of students to you, and also those job placement rates to really complete the life cycle. Is that something, representing yourself and your entity to the ability that you can speak, is that something that you would be interested in accessing?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the one great accomplishment that I've had at FAU is bringing in people to come and speak. That's really the only way. My first job that I ever had out of grad school was because somebody came and guest spoke at my class, and I wanted that job and I went after it. So I bring people to our classes to be able to have that ability. And then, as far as bringing in other types of curriculum, I think our students are thriving. They want it. They don't want that traditional sitting in the classroom and hearing a lecture. And I get my notes at the end of the semester, and there are some classes where I just want to speak to my students, and they're not the most successful classes. So adapting to what the students want, you have to be on top of that and know what they're looking for.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think that any input we can get from working professionals is invaluable, and any sort of framework we can develop as this business evolves and continues to evolve for standards is, I'm all for it. In the interest of transparency to the student, that the student also understands exactly what they're getting when they enroll in a program, like these up here. I think the big challenge is going to be the siloed nature of higher ed. Mm-hmm. And, having been at private 4-year institutions, having been at some pretty prestigious institutions and some community college, the way that accreditation as an institution and the top-heavy nature of administration dictates downstream what needs to happen, they're disconnected from the workplace. Yep. So therefore, by extension, the instructors are disconnected from the workplace. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge in sort of implementing, something like this, that if an institution is more concerned with the credentialing of their instructors rather than the careers of their students, you're not going to be able to find alignment between a standard that you can get someone upchain to adopt. So
I think the biggest benefit of having some sort of standard is really looking at the student that might want to transfer institutions. And that's the biggest challenge that I see across the board when, somebody comes to Syracuse and they are a sophomore transferring in, but none of those classes or very few of those classes actually count towards their degree. That means they're spending 4 years at Syracuse. And so, and that's just not Syracuse specific, that's across the board with institutions. So if there was a standard and you can take some of the core music industry classes that you would see as freshman and sophomore level classes that you could apply across the board for any institution, that'll help that mobility from university to university.
Amazing points. Thank you very much. So we'll jump into music employment. We have touched base on this already quite a bit, but I'd be very interested in, hearing your perspective as far as how your institutions and how your programs support internships, post-graduation employment, what type of networks you have, whether or not it's an existing network that you've just leaned on for a while, or that is a constantly developing network, whether or not those employers, which we obviously just spoke about that briefly, whether or not they actually influence the curriculum, how much, to what you can speak as far as that influence and that involvement is. But before we touch on that, and this information was taken from the Austin Music Census in 2015. Don Pitts put this together when he was music commissioner of Austin. But when we think about employment with regard to the music sector, we don't really take a step back, and we're going to lead into economic development here in a second. But these are some very impactful numbers, and there's a very large movement happening. But as you're listening to these individuals talk about their programs and how they boast for their students to, access gainful employment, keep in mind that in Austin, live music capital of the world, and this is not by any means calling Austin out. This is just showing some real data that exists. Not running through all these, but approximately 75% of Austin creators are below the median annual wage, and we're looking at half of Austin creators surveyed qualify for Section 8 housing. If you're going to these programs and investing so much, I mean, again, $47,000 for a private music 4-year degree, you expect employment out of that. And I will say the system is broken to a certain standard. Everyone up here has implemented some great standards and are absolutely addressing the problem. But as we go through this, keep these numbers in mind, because this is very hard, real evidence that things need to change. So I'd love to start with Dwight and then run through, like I said, your focus on employment.
Right. So I'll start with the internship idea.
Yep.
Because I think it's really important. When you're a student, any student entering the music industry has to understand that this is a relationship-driven business, right? It is not talent-driven, not money-driven. It's driven by relationships. And so we've had our biggest success with internships, and our students do 2 of them. They actually go their first year and they get foundational courses. Then they do an internship before they decide to specialize. Then they go through all their upper-level courses. Then they do a second internship before they graduate. So, and that's a really important component for us for job employment, because I remember when I was a junior in school and I did a great internship and they're like, hey, come work for us. And I'm like, I got a year worth of school left. So, being able to offer that. But we've had great success with internships, getting students to understand the relationship-driven nature of the business. They actually do better when they locate them themselves versus when we dive into our bucket O internships and sort of give them one. So we bring them here, for example. Our students, every student in our who's full-time enrolled in our program and is passing all their classes as a part of tuition comes to South by Southwest Music. They'll all be here next week. They'll be having the opportunity to network with 15,000, 20,000 other music industry professionals. And I think that's sort of really key if you talk about internships, that they have to get this buy-in component to what they're doing and understand what it looks like. When we have them do like most of my students come in, they think they're going to do audio production because they get it. I'll be turning knobs, understand what this looks like. Then they go to a studio for the summer as the fly on the wall, and they're like, if I have to sit in the dark and listen to bad singers, I'm going to kill myself, right? So, but they've also had live sound and they've also had music business, and so they understand some promotion, and they've also had some video. So we get a lot of students who transition out of that first internship into really knowing what they want to specialize in, and then taking a deep dive into it and really letting that, I say 80%, I think our number is about 85% of our students from their second internship segs directly into a job.
Great. Fantastic.
We require 3 internships prior to graduation, and one of the challenges that we've had over the years is on the funding side, because these are 4-credit internships, which means the student has to pay for those credits to essentially work in an unpaid internship in many of the situations. And so we've restructured how we've approached the internships, rather than looking at them as a 3-credit course, dropping them to a 1-credit to save a little bit of money there. But 3 of them are required, and we do push students towards New York, Nashville, LA for the most part. And there are some opportunities in Central New York, but Central New York, it's a B or a C market, and so the opportunities are not as plentiful. And that's why we really encourage these to be summer experiences across the board, but also internationally. We've got a campus in London, and we've got a campus in Los Angeles as well, which may as well be a foreign country when you compare that to Syracuse culturally. And so, students, if they can come out with a LA internship, a London internship, and then perhaps something in New York or LA, it's a well-rounded resume at that point.
Yeah, so our students are required to also do an internship, but one of, I think, FAU's greatest component is our record label class. So they are actually signing artists, learning how contractually to bring an artist in, go through the audio production, and then straight through the marketing value of it. But what they're doing is they're also booking shows at venues locally. And they're also working with other industry professionals within our area to make sure that the music that they are promoting is actually getting out there. To me, they're required to do it for 4 semesters. So for half of their time at FAU, they're actually engaging with real-world music industry professionals. But the one thing that I found really about, I'd say 3 years ago, was most of my students were struggling to get internships. They were struggling to get jobs, and I sort of took it upon myself to say, every single class, I'm going to have at least 3 to 4 guest speakers, and we'll Skype people in. But in September, we actually were granted through student government, which is part of our record label, and we were granted to put a summit on campus. So we did a full day-long conference where we were able to bring some industry professionals in to actually speak to our students. But we've been really great with the Career Center. We have a great guy, Mitch, who runs the entire program, and he oversees all of the career development for the entire university, but he's a music fan. So I basically went to him and said, if you like this, then we're going to do this. And so a lot of our students have been very fortunate with their internship opportunities, but in the South Florida area in particular, it's very Latin music driven, and some of our students don't want to go in that direction. So we do send to New York and Nashville and to LA, but the one thing that has been great on top of that is Grammy U. There's a division in Miami for us that we do get to tap into, and they've flown a couple of our students out to the Grammys. They've been able to volunteer there, and that just opens up a whole wide array of opportunities for them. But it is definitely my passion to help these students get their jobs after. I find that it's just it's a very competitive market, and working on it on the other side, as all of us have, we know how difficult it is. So I want our students to be as successful as possible.
That's great. One question I'd like each of you to touch on as well. When it comes to the employer relationships that you have, obviously you're here, you're proactive about, extending your network and redefining, existing relationships and obviously building new ones. But I'm curious to see whether or not there's any actual tangible influence from those employers when it comes to the relationships that you have, because I do own several music companies myself. I've staffed over 100 contractors, employees, interns over the years, and what I find is having somebody coming from a great music program, I still have to do a little bit of re-educating, if you will, to put it politely, and send them through some of my own training mechanisms and scenarios, and we built that into our technology with MDR and Music Career Map. But what I'm curious to see from a more traditional institutional perspective is whether or not you're actually letting those employers influence the curriculum, or whether or not you're developing curriculum that is based on those direct career pathways.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit of both. I definitely try to talk to my colleagues and ask them what they're looking for as far as internships or employment opportunities, but I would say it has to come from the student wanting to go in that right direction. But definitely, as far as trying to get a job, they do have to have that professionalism, and they have to be able to communicate at a certain level with these employers in order to feel like they're actually going to have that chance. So what I do is I'll sit down with a student. I'm very fortunate. We do have a large music department, so I'll have 60 to 80 students in a class, but I will get to know every one of them. So I'll take them out for coffee, we'll sit down for lunch, and I'll ask them exactly what they're looking for. And when they deliver their very blanketed resume to me, I tell them that that's not really that great because they can do so much more. So they have to feel like they have to go into that right direction, and they have to showcase who they are with their artistic value. So I try to give them a little bit different of an edge. And to me, I feel like as an employer looking at resumes all the time, it's the same blanketed copy paste. So I want something different. And although I'm on the business side of it, if I was in the audio side, I would want something very crazy and unique and creative to kind of showcase who they are and their personality. But in the classroom, they have to be professional. And if they don't send an email with a subject line, I mark points off for that, because we are all professionals and we all have to engage within that certain standard. So you definitely have to have a little bit of both of what the industry is looking for and knowing creatively how to kind of exude that.
We've cultivated a pretty nice relationship with employers over the years, and we are a named program, so we are lucky in that respect with Marty Bandier from Sony ATV as the name attached to our program. But over the years, we've built out our database of internship hosts and other folks that have come to speak at campus to around 1,500 or so contacts. And when it comes time for employment, we do a really multi-pronged approach to ensure that the students are in front of those employers. We have a billboard ad that comes out every year. Generally, it's the billboard issue, 1 or 2 issues after South by Southwest, and that'll also be accompanied by our one sheet that will be sent out to every one of these contacts. And so, there is a bit of a feedback loop here where we hear from them with what they're looking for. We get to provide them with information on the students that are looking for those particular jobs. But then we also do bring it into the curriculum area where we have those relationships, certainly with our alumni, but also via the reports that come back from students that are interning to see what they're doing, when they're doing it, why are they doing this, and what type of technology they're working with. So it is something that's much more of a two-way conversation for us.
Great.
So what you're really talking about is career development, right, at the end of the
Yes.
day. So we have a couple sort of things, and I don't want to make this a pitch for us, but I want to talk about an idea here. So we have this driving concept called Community as a Classroom. And every month that students are in class at Grooveview, we are doing a project in the Columbus community. They're required to do a project as a part of class. And they're required to do community service in a music setting as a part of what they do too. So they're getting, baked in as a part of curriculum. We're working with employers and nonprofits, from recording, middle schoolers who write for this a really cool thing called the Dick and Jane Project, which pairs musicians with middle schoolers. Our students will record them in our studio, all the way down to we have our own stage at the Columbus Arts Festival that we staff and book and promote. So that's a really big component to it, is obviously staying connected with the employers through curriculum. But I think even maybe more important than that is this idea of career development, and how when we have 2 classes at Grooveview on career development, their first class they ever get teaches them how to build their brand, business cards, creative resumes, traditional resumes, create an electronic portfolio that they use for 2 years. Their last class at Grooveview is a career development class. We bring in, just like everyone on this panel probably does, we bring in people to do mock interviews with them. They meet with banks if they want to have. We have a microloan program to start and launch their own business if they choose to do that.
Fantastic.
So, it's all about that professionalism and understanding what that means. And we have a really simple acronym for it at Grooveview. If my students were here, they'd roll their eyes. We have this thing called HAPPY, which means humble, adaptable, present, persistent, and innovative. Because we hear universally from all the employers we talk with over and over again, the technical skills are great, but if they don't have the soft skills, I don't want to hire them. And I'm not entirely convinced as an educator yet I can teach the soft skills, but I'm pretty sure I can coach it. So our students get assessed on how happy they are 4 times a term, or 4 times a year. They self-assess. All the faculty assesses them. They assess with their advisor, and then we show them their progress. And you're not on class on time, and you're always late. And when you're there, you're on your phone. So your happy score for present is like a 3 out of 5. The whole idea being that when they get to the end of their time at Grooveview, they have to have a cumulative score of 7 or higher. If they don't, they can graduate, but they don't get any leads or job endorsements from us. Because that's how important our employers keep telling us, again, back to the employers, they tell us this is what they care about. They can teach anybody the technical, they have to have a certain baseline, but you got to have the right attitude.
I love it. Absolutely. Thank you. So the next slide, economic development, it's something that we could hold several hours worth of panels on, but I do want to touch base because I don't feel it's brought into the conversation as much. We talk about the value that the universities provide to the students, but we don't always talk about the value that the institutions provide to their actual local economy, and that can be on a city, state, country-wide level. Taking into account, and I'll walk through, sound cities and talk about sound diplomacy here in a moment, but, just overall, what is your, I'm trying to think of the best way to present this. How important and how relevant is economic development to you and your institution? With regard to your organization, what does your relationship with the community look like? What is your value and prioritization of local versus non-local opportunities? All of you mentioned, the traditional hotspots, New York, LA, Nashville. And, that's great, and that's very much, instilled in the actual economy of music. But when we look at, things like Have you or your school or your city done an actual like economic impact survey to see what is the true value of music in your local economy? The formula is simple, and I'll open up the discussion here, but education and employment lead to economic impact. The previous slide, we talked about those stats with employment over musicians and people in the music field. I mean, this is an important part of the conversation, again, that's not always discussed. So, Dwight, can you pick up? Obviously, we've done some economic development work together.
Yeah, and Brian and I have worked a little bit with the City of Columbus on some economic development things. Just saw an article today that arts as a whole contributes more to the economy than agriculture, which I thought was incredibly fascinating. When you think about how big agriculture is, we're always talking about the U.S. economy. The arts contributes like by a factor of like 1.5 times more to the economy than music does. So when it comes to establishing sort of these baselines and economic development, we don't necessarily prioritize relationships outside of our local community. We do absolutely try and work with our students to continue to develop sort of globally, if you will. But we're small, and it necessitates for us that we are integrally involved with our local community. And being in Columbus in particular, it's almost better for us to be the biggest fish in the smallest pond than it would be to throw my students into New York or LA and expect them to find the same types of opportunities. So I think that the idea that economic impact studies, and when I started GrooveU, for example, I didn't go to other educators first. I went to the City of Columbus and I said, hey, how can we contribute as a school to creating economic drivers for our economy? So we worked with the City of Columbus and we worked with nonprofits, and we did all that before I had $1 of VC Capital One into the company.
Great.
We're in a little bit of a different situation. Economic impact of the university in Syracuse is huge because it's one of the largest employers. But in the music space, there's a bit more of a town and gown situation going on there. The students are going out and they've built a pretty robust house party, house show scene in Syracuse, but they're not going out to the traditional venues. And so it's something the university I know would like us to do more of, but many of the students remain closer to campus.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah, I would say I wish that we did more. The South Florida market in the music scene is very difficult. It's either you go to Miami and it's all Latin, or you go anywhere between like West Palm down, and it's kind of a cluster of everything. My students are definitely trying. I can see them every semester trying to knock down one more venue to get one more show booked. But truthfully, I wish that South Florida, we had something like this. I think it would be great. I mean, I grew up in South Florida and the music scene was awesome. And then 10 years later was nothing. So it's definitely something that I think definitely we could build off of what like Columbus is doing. I feel like we definitely need it.
We could use it too, because there's venues that have come and gone, and it would have been nice to see them last a lot longer, because those empty storefronts, it's just a strain on the city. So I'd love to see more of that happening too.
Do you find like I have so much turnover in my students? So like if they come in for a record label class, 2 years they're hustling, and then the promoter's gone. Then they have to start all over again. And I do find that it's just hard to keep up with it.
We're so small that there's probably 3 or 4 promoters in town that are not student promoters. So it's a smaller city.
And even building off that, our students are now promoters. That our alumni, have graduated and gone on to run pretty much one of the only mid-sized venues in the City of Columbus, Scully's. And then I have another one working for Celebrity, et cetera, which is a big regional promoter. And so they're both our alumni. So, the pipeline that exists for them to see the value in economic development and choose to stay in Columbus and grow the music scene, I think can be really invaluable especially if you have some benchmarks you can look at to see how it's doing.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue. Don Pitts has, I mentioned him earlier, he's the former music commissioner of Austin, now has Sound Music Cities. You have Shane Shapiro with Sound Diplomacy over in London. That's just extended into the U.S. And what these entities are doing, and by no way am I sponsored or seeing any benefit from this directly, full disclosure, but these entities are going into cities and actually measuring. They're doing these economic impact surveys, seeing what the true value of music is. and they're aligning all of the resources within town, formal institutions, informal, educational scenarios, pooling list of artists, venues, service providers, goods manufacturers, things like that. And it's amazing. I mean, going back to Dwight, what you led with, arts compared to ag, it's amazing to see how much music extends into the local economy. But again, economic development when it comes to, institutions, when it comes to job placement rates, things like that, it honestly doesn't make sense to me that we don't have more metrics on this, or that schools aren't boasting more about their, not necessarily their retention rates, but more so their, graduation rates, their employment rates, post-graduation, because it all comes back to economy. And that starts out at the local level, scales beyond the city to the state and country overall. So again, it's important to consider economic development, and your actual impact is a contributing factor. If you are an institution, if you're a student, how you can bring value beyond as a service provider. So a lot of things happening around the Music Cities movement, and if you're not familiar, I definitely encourage you to become familiar with that. Last thing I'd like to touch on as far as future outlook before we get into a Q&A is just everyone's perspective on, how things are going to shape. We're seeing a lot of disruption, obviously, because of technology, with regard to education in general, especially in higher ed. I always promote at these panels that, you are the agent of change. If you are stuck in a university that, if you're either working with a tenured professor, or you are a tenured professor, or you don't have a lot of flexibility with your department head, you can still promote things within the organization. Hopefully you can rally support from your students. There is some way that you can be a true agent of change, unless you are just, quite frankly, not interested in progressing your own program for your own benefit. But I can say, and feel free to use this in conversation, there is more of a disruptive wave coming to the education space. Now working in venture capital, I can say with Loud Capital, we have an actual Loud initiative that, potentially will be a fund that we will raise specifically for investment in ed tech platforms, and especially the data behind that. There are a lot of entities that are starting to add value offline, because again, retention rates are being challenged from these schools with $40,000 and $50,000 degrees, which respectfully, those institutions have value that they provide, but not everyone can align. So what I'm really hoping to see is that the wave of disruption when it comes to education does not clear out the newer entities of the Groove U's and the established entities of the Syracuse and the FAUs, but they actually work together, because it's the same industry that you're contributing, quality and value to. So why not align? I mean, I'm proud to say with MDR that we have several universities, two of which are up here, that work with our curriculum and our standard, and it should be a coexisting and a value-add environment for everyone. It's not a zero-sum game. In my mind, overall value that you can provide to the community and also to the industry overall, it's about the greater good, so to speak. And the nature of capitalism is that people are going to look for the better, the faster, the cheaper options, and these legacy institutions still have a lot of value to provide. So I'd like to hear, just a few quick thoughts before we get into the Q&A on what do you think the future of education, specifically to music, looks as far as outlook in general, things like that and beyond. So, Jen?
Yeah, I would say I have two things. The first thing is we have to start early. My high school that I went to was a private high school, and they had specific tracks. So you could do pre-law, you could do pre-med, but there was nothing for music. I was very involved in music and band my whole life, and I just enjoyed playing and I enjoyed music, but there was nothing there for me to know that there was a business. And until I sort of landed into it is when I made it into a career. So I'd love that for the future, to help these students that don't know that that's a career path or a track. And then the second thing is we as teachers have to do a better job with our students, and we have to make it where it's not just a lecture, where it is more of a workshop, where it is more of a collaborative effort. I sit in my one record label class, and my students teach me more than I teach them, and they know so much more. They're so much more in tune than what we think and what we know. And for the future, to give them the proper education that they need, they have to be able to teach to their peers, and then we have to be able to listen, adapt, learn, and then engage with our future classes.
That's great.
I also have two, and I think the first is being entrepreneurial. There's no better time to enter this business, and that's something that I've seen over the last really 10 years. where there's more money on campus and more relationships on campus to support the student that is an entrepreneur. We recently got into a relationship with Techstars, and just about a week and a half ago, the university announced $1 million as a fund that's going to happen every single year as small grants to student entrepreneurs. And there's an ecosystem that they've built to get the students to take it from idea to actually execute something. So that's the big one. And then the second is really the look at the global economy. And that's another area that we've tried to lead in. And we are embarking on global experiences this coming May, where we've got a handful of our students, and we're taking them to I believe it's South Korea, China, and Japan over the course of a 2-week trip. And then, next year will be likely Africa. And then the year after that, who knows? But it'll be basically a 4-year cycle. So entrepreneurial and global.
Yeah, and I love the entrepreneur statement, because you either are an entrepreneur in this business or you're working for one. So you better think like one. Small business aggregately is far and away the biggest part of our sector. So I think that's really important. I think the future outlook is, well, we already know we're in a growth industry. Last year, $49.5 billion in the music industry, projected to grow to $57 billion by 2021. So, that's great. That's good news for all of us who are training for that. Sound engineering technicians, for example, is on the top 500 fastest growing careers. So I think that's really important to understand. I think where we're headed for disruption, and we're already seeing it in a positive way, is there's going to be more inclusion, especially for women, all right, and especially for minorities, persons of color, LGBTQ. I think that I'm already seeing that. I've seen it since I've been in ed, of more and more females entering the field, more and more minorities entering the field. I think that's really important. And I think accountability and transparency is going to start being demanded by the student and the person paying the student's bills, for lack of a better way to put it. The fact that you can talk to some instructors at some institutions, and obviously nobody here, and they don't know their job placement rate, and you can't even find the institution's job placement rate online, is that's not going to happen much longer. And the more honest and open and transparent you are with the student when they enroll, so you're like, hey, we tell all our students, you're making a lifestyle choice. And we have a very long, protracted admissions process, as do some of these other schools, as a way to eliminate the student who thinks it's going to be fun and get the student in who's going to transition from a hobbyist to a professional. And that's going to require niches of schooling. You can't have a 15,000 member institution and get them quality relationships and get them to South by Southwest and get them to Japan and get them to cool places and bring in, when I was at the school that I went to, they'd always put everybody in the gym and they'd put up a guest speaker, and at the end that person would just get mobbed by like 500 students, and they go, there's your relationship building opportunity. Juggle, I don't know, get that person's attention. And obviously that doesn't work.
Right.
And so I think we're headed down this path of small, niche, lab heavy. We're training for an apprenticeship based industry, and the more we all understand that, I think the better off we'll be.
No, completely agreed on all fronts. I'd like to highlight John Zazara's here, MediaTech Ventures, which I am involved with. But it's taking this disruptive mentality out of a formal classroom, but also still allowing it to be a joint effort with the classroom. MediaTech has launched collective nonprofit educational, solution here in Austin, and then the continuation of this disruption goes from things that we've talked about so many times. The actual supporting the infrastructure beyond just the ideation into the incubation, the acceleration, and I believe we're going to see a lot more venture funds attached to that model, and that's exactly what media technology is with regard to media and technology ventures. So the future is going to be very much disrupted. You're going to see a lot of more of these closed ecosystems on a one-to-one case scenario, but what I'd like to see are organizations that are actually working in conjunction with the established legacy entities in town. It's strength in numbers. You're all, again, working towards the same, and I don't want to be redundant here, but we're all in the same industry. We're all trying to provide similar value. So, it's great to see organizations up here in this variety. It's great to see organizations like MediaTech and their, collective nonprofit education initiative. And at the end of the day, I think it's very bright for the music sector. I mean, it is a growth industry. You have, venture capital starting to finally look back inward to music industry. And I think, supporting women in music, supporting, minorities coming in music and providing solutions, disrupting, getting every single opinion that we can, and just everyone being hopeful that we can continue to grow this. Because if you look comparatively of music versus advertising or music versus other commodities, it's a relatively small industry, yet the inherent value that it provides beyond in seeing the capital flow out of the music industry is unreal. So, I could go on and on, but I think the future is bright. I think it's going to be disruptive, but I think that's a healthy thing. So on that note, if you'd like to learn more, I would encourage you rather to go to disruptmusic.edu. Right now, it's just a simple form. You can download the presentation. When we have the audio captured, we'll send that out as well. We have a lot of great material that we can offer between, all the panelists here. And then again, working with, people like MediaTech Ventures and Collective, we can distribute, things that will help you be proactive, things that will help you be that agent of change. So, I want to open up. We have a few minutes left here for questions. And before we do that, opening up through the Slido app or using the South by Southwest Education app, please remember to rate and leave feedback on our panel if you have enjoyed this. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and move on to any questions. Yeah. Do you mind using the microphone? Thank you.
We all know that if you're a professional musician and you're a playing musician, your work time is maybe 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock. I mean, a gig that's your normal gig. And if you're successful, you're going to get $100 for that. And you're going to do that every day of the week, which means that at the most you're going to make is a little less than $37,000 because there's only 365 days in a year. So there's a wide range of time for the professional musician that they need to fill, because you can't be professional just for 4 hours a day. Anybody see Amadeus, the movie Amadeus? Y'all know that. It's all about Mozart. And you'll notice Mozart, one of the finest composers in the world, he had to teach. That's how he made his living, was by teaching. All of us, we're all making our living and getting our health insurance, getting our pension, getting our retirement, because we're not in the music industry, we're in the education industry. What are we doing to helping making our students realize that, yeah, performing is fine, but if you're a professional musician, historically for decades, for centuries, you also have to teach. You were talking about how you got involved in this and how you were interested in becoming a musician. It was because you were probably played French horn or something like that in the band, right? So what are we doing to talking about our students and making them understand that, if you're a guitar player, it's fine to go ahead and take some private lessons and have 50 or 60 students a week so that you're making that living as a musician, as opposed to having the day job and then the thing that you're doing. So I'm just curious, what are you guys doing to encourage our students to be able to do that?
I give my students a reality check. I feel like somebody has to give it to them. So I have a lot of my students do play instruments, and there are some faculty that say, we talked about this last night at dinner, that some of my students, they want to go and play in a symphony. It's not a possibility for a long time. So I give them a little bit of a reality check, and I do make sure, especially on the business course side, that they have some other education to get into it. I played the flute. I don't play the flute anymore. I would definitely pick it up again if I had a chance to, but I'm successful in another route, and I'm still doing music and I'm still supporting. So as long as the student understands that they can still have a career and do what they need to in the industry, they can do both symbiotically.
I would say my encouragement would be, you don't have to teach to be a musician. That maybe the better outcome is, what can we be doing to train the musician to earn more than $100 a gig, right? Can the musician also make their own album? Can they learn the production skills and the marketing skills and the promotional skills, so that that's not money outflowing, it's money that they can use as a skill and invest where they need to, so that, the idea is that maybe I don't have to gig 300 dates a year. Maybe I can gig 200 dates a year. because the other 100 days where I would be gigging, I'm making records, I'm promoting myself, I'm involved in music publishing and licensing of my work. I mean, you want to talk about a huge long-term cash cow if you understand the mechanics of it. So I think it's less about saying, well, you know, I know that's the traditional idea. You have to, if you want to play professionally, you got to do your private lessons, or you got to have your studio on the side, and you've got to educate, and then you've got to play. I think maybe there's a third path, and it involves pursuing the commercial side and having the knowledge to pursue that commercial side aggressively.
Yeah, I respectfully would disagree with some of the statements that you made. I've ran an artist development agency for almost 9 years now, and we've graduated some artists up to platinum level. And a lot of artists are coming in at that $100 threshold a night. And to have them take a step back and do that exact math and say, this is, if you continue down this path, this is what you're going to make. You'll probably have to supplement income with some sort of day job. It can be within the music sector or outside. But what are your goals? What do you need to earn? How can we do that? And the reality is today we live in the age of the empowered creator, and the most valued asset of someone's career is their brand. And being able to leverage that brand and monetize that brand, you don't actually have to get on stage. You can literally be a YouTube star. You can be somebody who amasses a following by playing the hashtag game on Instagram and things like that. So having the core of the entrepreneurial background to everything that we teach and implement with the standards from a service-based and an education-based perspective, and showing that you don't have to rely on the consistent plateaued $100 a night, which for some musicians, that's their definition of success. Success is a relative term, and that is not a bad thing by any means. But having artists that are looking to build gold and platinum level careers, they need to realize the strength in their brand. They need to build inherent value in that brand, and we need to start scaling that up. And that's important for every artist at every level to realize, whether or not they decide to implement those standards. It's just it's an important part of today's culture in the music sector.
Let's grab another question.
Yes, absolutely.
Is this thing on? Excellent. So a lot of this comments you talked about today, which is incredible, is at a very high level education. Whereas we see a lot of art programs being cut due to STEAM initiatives and robotics facilities and coding camps being put in there, and music programs being taken out. And one of the things that I always got frustrated with was I didn't know shit about the music industry until I was in it, right? And then I had to learn and go from there. So what are some things that we could be doing at a more K through 12 level to engage the younger audience that do want to be the rock stars and see their favorite people on television and such? That's
a great question.
Yes.
I think some of the things that are already happening is, especially career centers are adopting a lot of this educational components into what they need to do, because it does satisfy a lot of the STEAM sort of requirements, right? If you throw art in there instead of STEM and STEAM. I think also an interesting thing that's happening is I just lost my train of thought. I saw that 1 minute pop up and off I went. But yeah, I think that you can start to implement it down at the lower levels if you remove the stigma that there's an art side and a tech side. I mean, they're blended, right? And the more that you as an educator can realize that and start to incorporate that, then I think it opens up a lot of opportunities for K-12 education.
I would absolutely teach the economics of YouTube and Spotify. I got to the point where at one point in my life, I would not pick up a penny because I'd see it on the ground and I was too good for bending over to pick it up. Now I pick that up and I say, that's somebody spending, almost 10 minutes with music that I've released, because I'm getting a payout of 0.0047 cents per stream on Spotify. So understanding that and the volume that you need to be a professional musician at that level, it's a very easy way to introduce that lesson and then build it out for, the merchandise, the tour tickets. Music publishing is a little bit harder of a concept for some to grasp, but recognizing the revenue streams is a great way to go about it.
Yeah, I definitely think adding it to the curriculum. I mean, I did music and symphony and I did all these things, but I didn't want to play past college. So had I known that there was a business element to it, I definitely would have gone that direction, and my whole college curriculum would have changed and I would have gone in a completely different direction. So I think it really falls on the teachers to help the advisors to get you in that right direction.
I know what I was going to say. A lot of tech programs in high schools now require credentialing in lieu of a diploma, right? So things like Pro Tools and Adobe, they count because they're industry recognized credentials. And so we've had a lot of success in Ohio by convincing some of the arts and tech programs to do that and implement that at the K-12 level.
And we're out of time, unfortunately, but the last thing I would say is try to get the actual parents involved in the conversation earlier. And, you know, the scariest thing a parent, 20 years ago is if their child said, I want to, go into the music industry. But now I think we can change that stigma attached to that because we can see that it's a growth industry and we can see that change, being that agent of change can actually start in the household and, allowing the K through 12 student to be more informed, take that literature to their parents, open up the conversation between the educators and the parents, be more supportive of that journey. So when they actually are in a position to start looking at schools, whether formal institutions or independent learning environments, they have that support from the beginning. So that being said, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you so much to all my panelists. Thank you so much for coming here. I hope you found this to be important. DisruptMusic.edu. We'll send out the presentation and the recording, and enjoy the rest of your South by EDU. Thank you.